Chris Evans.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A constituent of mine who is a mother and a carer for her disabled son wrote to me recently. She told me she's watching every penny and she's deeply worried about how she will afford energy in the coming winter. She is one of the 9 in 10 families with a disabled child, the Family Fund says, are struggling to afford simple household bills. What direct advice does he have for my constituent and thousands like her who are in a hopeless situation?
Well, Mr Speaker, there are indeed many people suffering at the moment, and I feel very sorry for the honourable gentleman's constituent. The government have supported households with the rising cost of living by maintaining the energy price guarantee at £2,500 from April to June 2023, saving households an additional £160. Over the course of the winter, the government were paying, on average, about half of people's energy bills. And for those living in households where there is a disability, of course, there has been an extra payment of £150.
Chris Elmore.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The most recent statistics published by the Welsh Government show that almost a quarter of those living in the private rented sector in Wales are living in fuel poverty. This is compared to only 13% of those people who own their own homes. Can the Secretary of State set out what additional support those who live in the private sector will get from the government? Because the reality is their rents are going up, their fuel bills are going up, and the government now just seems to be sitting idle and doing nothing to support these people.
Well, Mr Speaker, the government is certainly not sitting idly around, not supporting people. The government don't differentiate between whether somebody is in private accommodation or is renting accommodation. But what the government have done is to stipulate that those who are the least well off will get the most support. And that is why we ensure that pensions have gone up in line with inflation, the minimum wage has gone up in line with inflation, and those living on benefits have seen their benefits rise in line with inflation.
Mr Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As fuel poverty runs rampant across Wales, doesn't the Secretary of State realise how appalling it looks at a time when families right across Wales are struggling? Shell are making £61,000 a minute. When will his government get a grip, close the loopholes worth billions and extend the windfall tax?
Well, Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman should be aware the government have extended the windfall tax, and the government are charging very high levels of tax indeed, around 3 times the usual level of tax on companies that are taking oil out of the North Sea. And that's why it's so extraordinary that those who, on the one hand, call for a windfall tax on energy companies don't recognise that we're already levying it and don't want to support the government in allowing more oil and gas to be exploited from the North Sea, which will enable us to raise even more in taxation.
Gerald Jones.
Go on. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Tory ministers seem to think that the energy crisis is all over. I'm not sure when the last time the Secretary of State struggled to pay an energy bill, but bills are still almost double what they were before the crisis began, and the Tory government has scrapped the vital support. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that the way to get energy bills down for good is to back Labour's policy to retrofit 19 million homes and to reach 100% clean power by 2030?
Speaker, I have no idea who'd be paying for the proposal the honourable gentleman is putting forward. No doubt it'd be one of those things, one of the many things that is going to be paid for using the same tax about half a dozen times. What I can say to the honourable gentleman is that he'll be very pleased, no doubt, today that inflation is down yet again, and the government are well on course for achieving their target of cutting inflation by half, as well as growing the economy.
Savile Roberts.
Nonetheless, food inflation remains above 19% and it hits the poorest hardest, with Trussell Trust warning that the past year saw a record 185,000 food parcels provided in Wales. Meanwhile, supermarkets continue to make record-breaking profits. Many speak of a greedflation crisis. European governments have negotiated with supermarkets to cap food prices. Why won't his government do this too?
Well, Mr Speaker, I've already mentioned some of the help and support the government have given to the least well-off. I want to just remind the honourable lady that in addition to the pensions and benefits rising in line with inflation, there are payments of £900 to those on benefits, £300 to pensioners, £150 to those in households with disability. And quite frankly, Mr Speaker, if the honourable lady is seriously worried about food inflation, she should be talking to her colleagues in the Welsh Labour government who are propping up the Welsh Labour government about their ridiculous proposals to ban meal deals, which will make meals even more expensive for people in Wales.
Protecting Wales because Tory Brexit has served Wales badly. The EU Withdrawal Act and the Internal Market Act have grabbed Sened's powers. Paltry post-Brexit funding is robbing Wales of millions. Enough is enough. The House of Lords recently passed Lord Wigley's devolved powers bill to prevent any change to the Senate's powers without a two-thirds vote majority from MSs. Will the Secretary of State support Plaid Cymru's bill and ensure that there is time for debate, or is he happy to see the people of Wales lose the powers for which they have voted time and again?
Mr. Speaker, far from taking powers away from the Welsh Government, the Conservative Government have on a number of occasions actually increased powers to the Welsh Government. And by leaving the European Union, we have repatriated powers from Brussels, where we were being governed by an unelectable elite, and brought them back to both Westminster and to Cardiff. And if the Honourable Lady wants to stop money being wasted, she should have a word with her colleagues in Plaid Cymru who are propping up this Welsh Labour Government as they lose hundreds of millions of pounds wasted in the Betsy Cadwaladr Health Service, hundreds of millions of pounds spent on an airport with no planes, and over £100 million spent on plans for a relief road that's never going to get built.
Liz Twist.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on a range of issues. Interest rates are rising across the world as countries manage rising prices due to the pandemic and Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. But I'm very pleased to see that the UK average 2- and 5-year fixed mortgage rates have declined in recent months.
Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor failed to bring in a proper windfall tax at the budget in March. Does the Minister agree that there are still huge holes in that levy that mean billions of pounds that could be used to help Welsh households with the cost of living, and they've been ignored?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor, this Conservative Government, have brought in windfall taxes on energy companies, on oil and gas which is coming out of the North Sea. Energy companies are paying around 3 times more than other companies in taxation, and I hope the Honourable Lady will be supportive of those companies that want to take more oil and gas out of the North Sea so that we can raise even more in taxation to support the least well-off in the United Kingdom.
Shadow Secretary of State, Joe Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since his government's mini-budget, 43,000 Welsh households have paid an extra £20.3 million in mortgage payments. So that's a £20 million Tory mortgage premium in just 7 months. His government's economic recklessness continues to cause misery for people across Wales. So will he take the opportunity to apologise to them?
Mr. Speaker, the economic policies being pursued by this government are bringing inflation down, as the news today demonstrates. And I very much hope that the Honourable Lady will want to celebrate the fact that inflation is now falling, and this United Kingdom government are committing to seeing inflation halved. The policies of the Honourable Lady's party would push inflation through the roof and push us into another financial catastrophe and crisis of the sort that we saw the last time they left office.
Chris Clarkson.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 3 and 4 together. The government have established Great British Nuclear to drive forward the UK's new nuclear programme. GBN will be working with the government on access to potential sites for new nuclear projects, and I will continue to build on the clear cross-party support there is to promote Wales as the destination of choice for one of the first projects.
Chris Clarkson.
Diolch yn fawr, Gareth. My honourable friend, the member for Anismorn, has been subtly, almost subliminally, making the case for new nuclear in her constituency. But of course, with the advent of SMR, there's the opportunity for the communities across Wales to benefit from nuclear clean energy. So can I ask him what questions he's had with ministerial colleagues in Desnes and with the Welsh Government to make sure that Wales is primed to take advantage of this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have had a meeting with the Minister for Nuclear in Desnes, but I also met yesterday with the interim chair of GBN, Simon Bowen, and we had a very interesting and informative discussion around this emerging technology, which I think is very exciting and offers huge potential for Wales.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his answers thus far. Clearly, Wales has a bright future as part of the new nuclear capability across the United Kingdom. What further measures is he going to make, for example, on fusion as well as nuclear energy that's already being provided?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government have set out support for investigating nuclear fusion, but I fear that there might be others better qualified to give the detail on that. But what I can say to the honourable gentleman is that in all of the meetings I have had with various stakeholders, I have made the case for Wales to be in the forefront of everyone's minds as a place where we could have a new reactor or SMR technology. And of course, I've been encouraged very much by the member for Ynys Môn, who's been an absolute champion for nuclear technology and not for nothing is known across Wales as the atomic kitten.
Tony Antoniazzi.
But, Mr Speaker, his party talk on nuclear, they talk the talk, but, you know, it was the Tories that previously pulled the plug on new nuclear in Wales. He forgets. They've boasted about GB nuclear, but 2 years on, nothing has happened, Mr Speaker. Nothing at all. Isn't this just more the same broken promises from a tired Tory government that has run out of steam?
Well, Mr Speaker, it would be tempting, but time would prevent me from drawing attention to the very poor record of the last Labour government when it came to nuclear energy. The fact of the matter is, Mr Speaker, we are driving forward with a new nuclear reactor at Hinckley. We're looking to bring forward an FID on a nuclear reactor in the next term. And, Mr Speaker, the establishment of Great British Nuclear fully demonstrates our commitment to nuclear technology.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wonder if the Minister in his conversations about nuclear has discussed the pie-in-the-sky nature of small nuclear reactors, if he's discussed the lack of a cogent plan for nuclear waste, if he's discussed the unenviable unit cost with the Welsh comparison to renewables, and has he indicated to them that he's got a better plan that's not nuclear?
Mr Speaker, the fact of the matter is that when one considers all of the costs of renewable energy, nuclear comes out very well, not least because it is it is not possible to predict energy. Well, it is not possible, Mr Speaker, it is not possible to predict when exactly the sun's going to shine or the wind's going to blow, and that is why nuclear has a role to play in our march towards net zero by 2050.
Slane Saxby.
Question 5, please, Mr Speaker.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Speaker. The tourism industry in South Wales and South West England is incredibly important, and I understand that councils on both sides of the Bristol Channel are in discussion on how to progress this issue. I'd be happy to meet my honourable friend to discuss it in more detail.
And I thank my honourable friend for his answer, and I wonder, ahead of that meeting, might he be able to secure an analysis of a passenger ferry service and the benefits to those businesses between Ilfracombe and South Wales?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. It's important that we grasp all opportunities to level up our economy through tourism, and that could include a passenger ferry between Ilfracombe and South Wales. Of course, many of the policy levers affecting the visitor economy in Wales are devolved, and it's important that interested parties work closely with the relevant councils on the matter. Mr Speaker, the UK Government is passionate about tourism, unlike the Welsh Government, who seem more focused on putting in place a tourism tax.
Stephen Kinnett.
Question 6, please, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Steel is vital to the UK, and we are actively engaging with our industry to secure a positive and sustainable future. Industrial sectors, including steel, have been able to bid into government funds worth more than £1 billion to support them to cut emissions and become more energy efficient.
Stephen Kinnett.
Mr Speaker, the governments of the United States and the EU have developed active industrial strategies with multi-billion-pound investments to support their steel industries as they transition to green steel production. And here in the UK, the cavalry is coming in the form of a Labour government and our £3 billion Clean Steel Fund. What a contrast with the party opposite, which is completely and utterly asleep at the wheel on steel. So when will the Secretary of State start standing up for our proud Welsh steel industry, and when will he start getting his colleagues in Cabinet to wake up to the fact that we are losing the race for green steel investment?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, the honourable member will be aware that the Secretary of State for Business and Trade visited Tata Steel in Port Talbot only very recently, and I think that shows her commitment to it. He'll also be aware of the British Industry Supercharger that was announced only a few months ago, which aims to bring energy costs for energy-intensive industries such as steel production in line with those of other similar countries.
Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, healthcare services are, of course, devolved to the Welsh Labour Government, but it is deeply worrying that only last week the Welsh Government revealed that their target for people waiting over 2 years for treatment has once again been missed, with over 31,000 people waiting in pain for over 2 years for their treatment. And in England, with virtually 20 times the population, the equivalent figure is virtually zero.
Luke Evans.
One of the most important things to improving healthcare systems is the ability to compare data. There's a problem, though, if different legislators use different metrics. So will the UK government agree to an agreement between the devolved nations to share the same data so that comparisons can be made adequately?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman makes a very good point indeed. We do need comparable data so that we can see exactly what is going wrong in the health service in Wales. We already know from the data we've got about the 31,000 people who've been waiting more than 2 years in pain for treatment. We know that the Welsh Government have a copy of a report, the EY report into what's gone wrong in Betsy Cadwallader Trust, a report which they are sitting on and trying to hold secret because it points out that over £100 million was misspent whilst by the Health Board under the control of a Welsh Labour government.
Van Dixon.
Question number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Seriously.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on a range of transport matters. HS2 will benefit people travelling from North Wales to London with the interchange at Crewe, providing shorter journey times for North Wales than is currently possible on the West Coast Main Line.
Chester Station is the key that can unlock connectivity between England and North Wales. Not only is connectivity vital for thousands of rail users, but also for businesses on both sides of the border and beyond. Will government commit to the rapid electrification of the North Wales train line, which will transform the North Wales and Cheshire regional economy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that's one of the best questions I've heard from anyone on the opposite benches so far this morning. Yes, I think that electrification of the North Wales coastline would be a very good idea, or certainly improvements would be. As the honourable lady will be aware, there are various improvements to the Welsh railway structure being discussed at the moment in ARNEP, and I look forward to ARNEP being published shortly.
Alexander Stafford.
Please, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues to discuss transport links between Wales and the rest of the United Kingdom. Roads are devolved to the Welsh Labour Government, and their opposition to the M4 Relief Road, and indeed to any kind of road building at all, continues to hold the Welsh economy back, a matter which is of great disappointment to myself and my Cabinet colleagues.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The economy of Wales has always worked on an east-west basis. So, for example, if you're starting a journey from Bangor in the north, it takes 3 times longer to travel to Cardiff in the south than it does to Manchester or to my seat of Rother Valley. Can the Secretary of State offer an explanation then of why the Welsh Government has banned all new road development, or how that might possibly help the Welsh economy?
Hear, hear. Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raises an excellent point, and the Welsh Government's response to the roads review is absolutely extraordinary. Their opposition to road building is going to hold the Welsh economy back, and I would urge the Welsh Labour Government to reconsider the impact of banning all road building on the long-term prosperity of Wales.
Morgan.
When he delivered his budget in 2020, the Prime Minister, who was then the Chancellor, promised a bypass by Lannymennock and Pan to my constituency on the road that links Oswestry and Welshpool. Can the Secretary of State tell me whether that road will ever come to fruition, or whether that's just another broken promise?
Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear all of that question, but I think it related to the Lannymennock bypass in mid-Wales. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that the Welsh Labour Government will continue to receive Barnett consequentials for the road building that takes place in England, and it is a matter for the Welsh Labour Government to decide whether or not they wish to spend that money on building new roads, which is something I would like to see them do, or whether they wish to keep throwing it away on white elephants like the airport, which has lost hundreds of millions of pounds over the last few years.
Dave Morgan.
Question number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 10 and 11 together. This government is committed to supporting the decarbonisation of Welsh industry. We have committed £20 billion over the next 2 decades to the deployment of innovative carbon capture technology, and this builds on the existing support for the HyNet cluster in North Wales and North West England, and the £21.5 million to develop the South Wales industrial cluster.
Steve Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The best way to bring down bills in the long term for businesses in Wales and across the UK is to help transition industries away from fossil fuels. That is why Labour is calling for a national wealth fund so that we can help industries like steel win the race for the future. Can the Minister tell the House specifically what steps he's taking to help heavy industry decarbonise?
Well, I thank him for that question. Of course, he's aware of an array of funds that are in place to help decarbonisation. The Carbon Capture, Utilisation and Storage Infrastructure Fund, the Industrial Fuel Switching Fund, the Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre, the Competitive Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, and the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, amongst others.
Order. Bill Lesterson.
But the UK is the only country in the G7 whose steel industry is currently in decline.
Yeah.
So why won't the government end their sticking plaster approach, match Labour's commitment to a £3 billion green steel fund, and invest in a long-term plan to decarbonise the vital steel sector in Wales?
Well, I would repeat what I said earlier, which is that the Secretary of State has visited the plant in Port Talbot very recently. She's committed to it. We do need to see an electric arc furnace. That is the way forward to protect jobs and to ensure that we have steel production in the UK.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The industrial corridor that runs along South Wales all the way west to my constituency is one of the most important in the UK. It's also one of the most challenging when it comes to decarbonisation. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the government's policies, the Powering Up Britain set of energy interventions, the Celtic Freeport that we secured, point the way to a successful decarbonisation strategy for this critically important part of Wales?
Yeah. Well, my right honourable friend, of course, is absolutely right there. South Wales doesn't have former oil and gas fields in which we can store carbon, but it does have the Celtic Freeport, and non-pipeline transport of carbon, captured carbon, to fields elsewhere is what will secure decarbonisation for South Wales.
Robbie Moore.
Number 12, Mr. Speaker.
Tuesday.
Mr. Speaker, the coronation saw people in Wales and right across the United Kingdom come together to celebrate the monarchy. It was a wonderful occasion and it united our public and demonstrated just how strong our union is.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the coronation weekend, I had the pleasure of attending a fantastic coronation church service in Haworth Parish Church, listening to our brilliant Yorkshire harpist Fiona Katie Widdop, as well as joining many other community events. And I know that my right honourable friend attended the similar sorts of events in Wales, which undoubtedly brought the whole of the United Kingdom together. So what does my right honourable friend see as the legacy of the coronation and the fantastic weekend of community spirit?
Mr. Speaker, I thought it was notable that His Royal Highness talked about the importance of service and volunteering being at the heart of the coronation and encouraged us all to take part in some voluntary work. So I was very pleased to join the residents of Hennock Village in my constituency for an afternoon of litter picking the day after the coronation, which I thought was almost as great an honour as attending the coronation itself was.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Minister very much for that there. The celebrations for the coronation in Wales were exceptional. The celebrations for the coronation in Northern Ireland were equally successful. Does the Minister agree when it comes to cementing the Union, the fact that all four regions can be one country, that's Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England together, is an indication of why the royalty is so important to all its great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, always better together?
Mr. Speaker, to that wonderful question I can only reply yes.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Devolution of Crown Estates in Scotland. Sorry, question 13.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is committed to supporting renewable energy generation in Wales, including for the innovative tidal stream technologies at Morlais and through our flagship Contract for Difference scheme, and supporting the huge potential of our floating offshore wind industry through the £160 million in FLOMIS funding for port infrastructure.
Alan Brown.
Devolution. The devolution of Crown Estates in Scotland has allowed the Scottish Government to have a more coherent supply chain development for renewable energy. Now, 75% of the Welsh public want to see Crown Estates in Wales devolved so that Wales can benefit from natural resources and renewable energy. Will Westminster listen to the people of Wales, or is it in our case Westminster knows best?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, devolving the Crown Estates would actually be very risky for Wales, given the fact that at the moment the revenue spent by the UK Treasury is invested across the whole of the United Kingdom. But I can assure the honourable gentleman that this UK government will be absolutely committed to seeing renewable energy spread across the United Kingdom alongside our other priorities of halving debt, halving inflation, cutting debt, ending small votes and reducing NHS waiting lists in the areas where we're responsible for doing so.
Mr. Speaker, Anglesey leads the way in renewable energy, and yet it's being let down by poor connectivity. This week, the Britannia Bridge closed suddenly, and given there's a 7.5-tonne limit on the Menai Suspension Bridge, it's created absolute chaos. Does the Secretary agree with me that Labour in Cardiff should be focused on building a third crossing?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady representing Anglesey is absolutely right about this. The Welsh Labour government need to start building roads and start building bridges as well.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Sean Hodgson.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties